Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to this episode of Watch Chronicler Unscripted, the podcast available on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes or any other podcast player, as well as a video on YouTube. In today's episode we're talking about the GPHG, which is the Grand Prix d'Horlogerie de Genève. This is the Oscars equivalent for the watch industry and has been run for quite a few years now. But for many years it's been regarded as something of an insider's event. Certainly the choice of watch is sometimes obscure, with some quite strange choices winning for different categories, even when, to be perfectly honest, I don't think the public or popular opinion would have followed this view. But this year we have a big change to it, in terms of the way voting takes place, and so I'd also like to go through the various watches which I think are most interesting and really deserve to be noted amongst those which have been put forward. In fact, the 84 watches put forward in the 14 different categories, with 6 watches going into each. So today we have everything from history to high horology, to the very best of dive watches in their respective categories. Of course, if you enjoy this podcast, please do follow us on whichever platform you enjoy it most. It really helps us to keep producing them and to keep them coming in future with new and interesting topics. If you want, you can also go over to the watchchronicler.com website to be able to read our articles alongside listening to our podcasts to really get the full Watch Chronicler experience. So what is the Grand Prix d'Horlogerie de Genève? Well, it is this Oscar-style event during which a number of different categories, 14 categories in fact, ranging across different types of watches, men's and women's watches, different varieties, different levels of complication, to show you the very best, or at least what is presumed to be the very best of the watch industry. Now, it's not Swiss exclusive. There are plenty of watches from other countries, be they from Germany or indeed from Japan, as Seiko this year has had quite a considerable showing. And as an event, the function really is to raise awareness and interest around the Swiss watch industry. Now, when this event was first conceived, there was perhaps more need for it, because this event started in 2001 and only became a full foundation in 2011. Of course, since 2001, the watch industry, courtesy of the online world, has developed enormously, with micro brands, revived brands from the past, and completely unique brands like MB&F, for example, which show a very different side to watchmaking, and one which I must say is eye-opening and often utterly stunning. And the general organisation of this event is done by a variety of different bodies, but it's owned or run directly by the region, by the canton. So it is very much a Swiss event, and so as a result does have a Swiss focus. But then again, I think Switzerland is the ideal country to host such a show, because whilst Switzerland I think sometimes gets some flack from enthusiasts as being behind Germany and Japan in certain areas of watchmaking, they have a length and breadth of experience in how to make watches, and that's something which you can't develop overnight. The Swiss really do have this culture of understanding what works in a movement. And so I think Switzerland is the perfect place, and of course Geneva is a fantastic place for it as well, as more of a jewellery capital, but still somewhere with a very strong culture of watchmaking, with for instance the Geneva seal and such houses as Patek Philippe based in the area. In the past, however, there has been a certain amount of resistance to the GPHG, and I make no secret of the fact that I myself saw it as somewhat unnecessary when there was such extensive coverage being provided by so many leading voices in the watch industry. This was especially the case because with only 30 members on the panel choosing these watches, all of whom were of course industry insiders, as they should be really for the people who are going to be choosing these watches, there was a certain suspicion of friendships making the difference, of some somewhat biased choices, and a generally irrelevant result. Certainly to the average consumer, a generally irrelevant result. But in 2020 we see a reform of this competition, of this show, which I think promises a fantastic future for it, and really what this show should have been from the start. So now the voting body is composed of 350 individuals from similar backgrounds, CEOs of brands, journalists, influencers, leading lights in essence in the industry. And I think this should give a very wide breadth of interest, but also of knowledge and opinion on these watches from around the world, which I think is crucial. In the West, we very often ignore the fact that a lot of brands have completely different catalogues for the Far Eastern market. Take, for example, a brand like Tudor. They have models specifically sold only in that market, which I think is fascinating. Like, for example, the new Tudor Royal, which has an integrated bracelet, which we haven't seen here in the West, but which they have there in China, for instance. And the way this works is, like the Oscars, these watches are broken down into categories. These categories present different aspects of watchmaking, and I'm going to lead you through 5 different interesting examples later in this podcast, which I think deserve to be noted, even if they may not deserve to win the prize, but I'll explain that later. And so there are 6 watches in each category as far as finalists go, and then a single watch will win the prize. Of course, GPHG does have some quirks, such as, for instance, that Rolex doesn't participate. This is, I think, an interesting aspect because, of course, Tudor does participate, but I think this reflects the way the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation works, in the sense that Tudor is the fun, approachable side of Rolex, whilst Rolex is unreachable, separate. In fact, it doesn't even have a face. There's no sort of character around Rolex. Rolex is above all of that, and I think they've played their cards extraordinarily well over the past few decades in this way, so it does make sense that they're not present. But a crucial change for this year is the fact that GPHG will be far easier, or rather was far easier because the process is over, but was far easier for brands to apply, which is crucial to having a wider breadth of interesting pieces to show, and I think this is crucial to making a more interesting show and one which is more relevant to the average consumer. To start off with one of the most popular and interesting categories, because it seems so far from the high horology roots of GPHG, is the dive watch category. Dive watches have become a real phenomenon in the last few years, and so it's understandable that they should occupy a space within the various prizes of this competition. Now, there are a few very interesting watches here. For instance, the new Ming diver is a stunning piece, the 1801 H41 1000-meter diver with a very new attitude to making a dive watch. We also have the new Breitling Super Ocean and the unique, but in my opinion overpriced, Doxa Sub 300 Carbon, although a watch which I think is gorgeous to behold. But the watch which just has to win is the Grand Seiko SLGA 001, or 60th anniversary 600-meter dive watch, with a brand new spring drive movement. With its large 46.9mm case, this titanium watch is not for the faint of heart or for the small of wrist, because this uses high-intensity titanium, as Seiko states. Now, we don't actually know the composition of this titanium alloy, but we do know that it's a form of titanium which is particularly resistant to scratches, a regular complaint, really, amongst those who own titanium watches. But with its titanium case, its rotating bezel, its cathedral-style hands, and of course its blue dial, it's nothing new where appearance is concerned for Grand Seiko, and again with its 600-meter water resistance, it's also nothing new there. What's crucial here is that priced at £8,350 before taxes, it has Grand Seiko's latest and most important change to spring drive, which I think we've seen. This movement revises our enjoyment of spring drive by having the whole gear train arranged under just a single bridge to protect them from impacts, whilst we have a redesigned magic lever system for automatic winding, which is more efficient as well as being more robust, and this movement is much thinner than we've previously seen from these spring drive movements. Crucially, it also uses 2 small spring barrels rather than 1 large one in order to have a more even torque delivery, which is also compensated for by the spring drive system anyway, but it's nice to see, and the power reserve increases to a full 120 hours or 5 days. But the improvement doesn't end there, because this new movement is thermocompensated to avoid any changes in accuracy at different temperatures, whilst it's 50% more accurate at 10 seconds a month than previous versions, courtesy of a specially selected quartz crystal. Altogether, this is just such a feat of engineering, it deserves to win on merit alone. A category which tends to bring out a bit of fun is the Petite Aiguille category, which is to say small hand, which is designed for watches priced between 4,000 Swiss francs and 10,000 Swiss francs. And there are a few very interesting choices. There's the Bell & Ross BR05, which, whilst derided when it was first launched, has turned out to be a beautifully produced example. We also have the new version of the Breitling Super Ocean, the new Super Ocean Heritage, with a stunning bezel and remarkable dial, as well as a stunning piece from Habring, a brand producing some of the most impressive chronographs at affordable prices we've ever seen. But the watch which really captures my heart is the Sarpaneva Moomin watch. This 39mm watch, and a very slim one at that, at 8.9mm high, is a watch which presents me with something different to the usual chase for better mechanical performance. Instead, this watch uses an off-the-shelf but nicely made Soprod A10 Swiss movement, but instead puts the time into a whimsical and extraordinary dial, you could say, celebrating the Moomins, characters which now have their 75th anniversary in 2020, and so in order to celebrate this Finnish watchmaker has chosen to create a reasonably affordable but also very exciting and beautifully made homage to this. So this watch is 100 metre water resistant and comes in the form of a two-hand piece with a choice of 3 different hand colours. The dial, though, is really what I want to talk about, because it's this beautiful multi-layered dial with different colours of superluminova to give a colourful background at night. The dial itself is beautifully made, though, in steel and in several components and parts, which come together to create this three-dimensional and highly deep dial appearance with the quintessential hands of the brand in different colours. It's a lovely looking piece, it's a unique piece, and I think it's one which should make people smile. In the chronograph category, there are plenty of very, very valid pieces. On the more affordable end, we have the new Breitling Top Time, which I happened to handle a few days ago in London, and which is absolutely stunning. I didn't think much of the watch before handling it, but it's a stunning piece, beautifully executed, and I think symbolic of a very new era for Breitling. We then have the watch which definitely deserves to win, which is the H. Moser and C. Streamliner, which has a gorgeous flyback chronograph, a unique and exquisite movement, but also a case which has revolutionised what we expect from a high horology integrated bracelet piece. It's a stunning example, and one which deserves the win. But it's not the watch I love. But then we have the Atelier de Chronométrie ADC8, which is the watch which I love. This watch in 18 karat grey gold with a 38.9mm diameter is possibly the most beautiful watch I've ever seen. It is completely stunning and produced to a standard which you just don't expect. Now this is an 80+ thousand euro watch, so it's not something for the faint of heart, and also this particular example is unique. But this watch is a thing of utter beauty, with its Bombay style lugs or corne de vache lugs to look like cow's horns protruding from the top and bottom of the case. It's pure 1950s charm. But the quality is just beyond belief. The dial has this black coating with the finest of printing. The hands have different finishes, even the finesse taken to brush one of the second hands and polish over the top of the other to create a curved top is just beyond what you would expect at any price. It's an utterly stunning watch, and the design has been taken care of extremely well too, in terms of the design of the hands, the numerals, even the pushers. It's an exquisite piece with a pulsation dial to measure your pulse, as you can imagine, and of course with a rattrapante chronograph. Based on a Venus 185, a movement from the mid-20th century, this rattrapante chronograph watch is of course manually wound with 280 components, 50 of which are unique to this watch, including some titanium wheels. It does of course have double column wheels on the back to operate the two aspects of the chronograph, and runs at 18,000 vibrations per hour, a leisurely rate by today's standards, but very much of its time. But you see, this watch doesn't end there. The movement is utterly exquisite. The black polishing on the various top components on the back of the movement is exquisite and beyond what you would expect at any price. The way the column wheels are finished, the way the edges are beveled, the way there is anglage everywhere. You see the tightest of corners beveled with unbelievable skill. This is world-class watchmaking and something truly new for this watch industry, and I think the most beautiful watch produced thus far by this Spanish brand, if the most expensive, at 80,000 euros, and more in fact if you choose options for this piece. A watch which I would have wanted to speak about in today's podcast is the Ferdinand Berthoud FB2RE, which is an utterly stunning watch, a truly remarkable piece of watchmaking, but I've actually spoken about it before, so if you want to hear about that, look at my video about Geneva Watch Days, where you'll find information about that piece. But a watch which I think deserves the win in the men's complication category is the Gruble Forsey Handmade 1, a watch which is unique in its approach to watchmaking as a totally handmade watch. At face value, this 43.5mm watch in 18 karat white gold is a simple affair. In the world of high horology, it is simply a manually wound 1-minute tourbillon with a 60-hour power reserve running at 3 Hz. But there's far more to this watch than first meets the eye, because this is a watch which is produced almost entirely without mechanical assistance. As a result, this watch requires a scarcely believable 6,000 hours to create. The reason for this is that often the components have to be developed differently to actually be produced by hand than by machine. Take for example the tourbillon carriage, which is composed of 69 parts, a considerable increase on what you would see in a CNC-made equivalent. It's worth noting that the 272 parts inside this watch require 35 times longer to produce in the case of the tourbillon, or if you look at the wheels within this watch, they require 600 times more time in order to be produced than if they were produced by a machine. In fact, the only components, putting aside things like spring bars, gaskets or the sapphire crystal, which need to be produced by a machine are the jewels within the movement and the mainspring. Apart from that, everything is handmade. And I know this may sound ridiculous, but in a lot of high horology watches, including Patek Philippe, a very large number of components are produced by machine, because over the years it's been the logical direction to go in order to produce ever more complex and interesting watches, and go to lengths which just wouldn't be possible in a handmade piece. So if only for effort, this watch deserves to win the award, it's also a truly stunning example of watchmaking, and through its skeletonized format, it reminds me of classic watchmaking from the 18th century, for example, just because of the shapes, the colours, and the frosted finishes. The final watch to note is the MB&F legacy machine Thunderdome. Aside from having a truly superb name, this is a watch which is the product of several legendary and remarkable watchmakers, such as Éric Coudray from the Vallée de Joux, but we also have work from Kari Voutilainen in the development of the movement itself. So we have a remarkable background to this watch, but then on top of this, MB&F have worked with these watchmakers to create the fastest moving tourbillon ever made. Before rushing into details, this watch is 44mm wide by 22.2 high as a result of having a very heavily domed sapphire crystal. Underneath this is a remarkable manually wound movement, which is exquisite to behold from the back, with 63 jewels and a 45-hour power reserve. There are 413 components here, yet from the back, it doesn't look all too unconventional, even if it is truly stunning, with its various wheels arranged on different cocks, and of course a power reserve indicator with a blued hand. But throughout this movement and dial, we see a lot of Kari Voutilainen in the decoration and the aesthetics of its construction, which in the case of this watch are just as important as the mechanical aspect. Even the dial has been designed with Kari Voutilainen to create this guilloché pattern. Then we have the tourbillon, which is placed on the very top of the movement, just next to the heavily tilted dial. This is a remarkable piece of engineering, with a triple axis tourbillon, that's to say with the balance wheel inside two cages, all rotating in different directions. The result is that between them, they turn in 8 seconds, 12 seconds, and for the outermost cage, every 20 seconds, creating the fastest moving tourbillon in history. You then have a spherical style of balance wheel in the centre, with the balance spring in its core in the form of a marine-style chronometer type of cylindrical spring to create a better level of accuracy. Of course, this watch isn't designed for accuracy really, it's designed for show, but it's remarkable they've used this to create a wonderfully accurate product. Finally, they've used a Potter escapement, something unbelievably rare to find in a watch, in order to free up space to make this tourbillon possible. Overall, it's a remarkable piece, as are so many in this competition, and of course it would be wonderful to go through them all, but I think in this podcast I've covered all of the most interesting ones for me, although I'd love to hear what you think of them, and also which watches within this competition and within the finalists list you find most exciting. I really look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like, share and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or follow us on whichever platform you like to enjoy this podcast on. Thank you very much for listening. This is Armon from watchchronicle.com, out.